at Toro, they had this thing called the Quarter Century Club. And it was this big wall in the main hallway of all the people who had worked at Toro for 25 years or longer. And they would celebrate it and stuff like that. And I remember talking to a guy who was retiring from IT. And he was there when like the first mainframes went in, like, and when they came out, like his career kind of spanned that. And I remember kind of thinking that I don't want to be that. And nothing against like him and people who want to, but like it felt like you don't really get things change so fast in engineering and software that like if you stay at the same place for too long, you're not really getting any more experience. You're just redoing the same year over and over and over again. And so I think that's my theme, is that I don't want to do the same thing over and over again.
So the team out there found this photo of you. Could you explain what's going on here?
This is an amazing photo. So I put together a game show that was like modeled after Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, called Who Wants to Be a JavaScript Heir, where I'd ask ridiculous JavaScript questions. And I set this up to do at a conference in Oslo, Norway, called NDC. And what I didn't know at the time was that where this conference is at the same place that the Norwegian version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is actually filmed. And so when I talked to them about it, they like instantly knew what I was doing, and they had all the lights ready to go and all of the smoke ready to go, and
That's
just like
wild.
And it looked like the actual show. So what this picture doesn't fully capture is that this is in the middle of a stadium. And these are giant screens facing in every direction, and there's thousands of nerdy conference attendees around me about to get completely overwhelmed by how bad JavaScript can be sometimes.
That's awesome. Is it on video somewhere?
There's clips of it somewhere, yeah.
All right. So I've got 2 rapid fire questions.
2.
What is the top JavaScript bug that you see in production?
The number one. So we actually publish this. We anonymize all of this, and it's out on TrackJS.com. We publish it every week or whatever. But the number one is almost always script error. Just the word script error, which is the obfuscated version of some error blew up from some origin that's not your page. Some other script came in and blew up, and it hides all of the error details from you, so you have no idea what actually happened or how to fix it.
So it's like ad or third-party code, somewhat like.
Well, it could be third-party code. It could be you hosted your scripts on a CDN somewhere and you didn't properly decorate them to reveal the error. It could be one of your vendors. It could be Stripe. It could be any third party that you include for whatever reason.
Got it. So completely vague.
Yeah, completely vague. Like something blew up. If you were looking at it locally, it wouldn't look like script error.
Yeah.
But you ship it off to production and you start monitoring it, and then that's all you get unless you decorate it in the right way.
All right, and then the top performance issue that you see regularly.
Ooh. The top performance is a little bit more diverse. It tends to be all over the place. I would say the most common is people who don't optimize their images properly. They want a beautiful image like this one that just pops, but they don't like properly compress it or use it at the right resolutions or make it responsive so that you hit it on a slow mobile device, but it's still downloading a megabyte of JPEG or whatever.
Yeah, I see that all the time. Yeah, absolutely. Optimize your images, people.
Yeah.
And then are there any special skills that you have that people might not know about?
I take silly technical jokes way too far. That is my number one skill.
All right. Do you have an example?
So this is an example. I was joking with somebody at the bar about like doing a JavaScript game show, and I took it way too far. I had a silly joke online many years ago about a conference about Notepad that like I made into a real thing.
Notepad
and
conf.
That turned into reality.
Yeah.
I was out drinking with somebody with some other conference speakers about like a conference for the speakers to just show off their ability to tell jokes, and I turned that into a real thing called PubConf.
Yeah.
So generally it's just being obsessive and thinking that something is funny and then taking that joke to extremes. That's awesome. That's my superpower.
Yeah, and how many of those comedy shows have you run?
35 35, 36.
Jeez. And they're always like kind of attached to a conference, right? Like NDAC, Oslo.
Yeah, I don't have a budget or anything like that.
Yeah,
so it's usually a conference that I'm going to. I partner with them to hang on to a couple of their speakers for like one extra night, and we rent out a bar and throw a comedy show.
So I just kind of peeked at your LinkedIn. So you went from school to Toro, and you said Toro was like more of like this system side or what?
Yeah, so I like to describe it as I worked for a company that made giant spinning knives, because that's way cooler than saying I worked for a lawnmower manufacturer. But Toro was great. I worked at Toro for like 6 or 7 years, and I started there like on like the operations side. So I was a Windows system administrator. And that job was actually great because I was coming on at a time where they were doing like this big, like worldwide migration from like old Novell NetWare to Microsoft. And they needed somebody to like go to all of the plants and distribution buildings and something like that and just like manage the project. And everybody else was like old and had kids at the time. So like I got to do that. So I spent 18 months basically on the road going all over the world to these Toro facilities doing this migration, which was a fantastic travel opportunity as a 20-something-year-old.
Yeah, one of my early jobs I actually had, it was like kind of IT, it was like inventory management. I had to go to all of the Genio factories like around the state of Minnesota. It was kind of cool to see like the computers powering all these factories and stuff. So kind of reminds me of that a little bit. But yeah, then you kind of like parlayed that, so you got into software engineering and then you started consulting?
Yeah, so Toro gave me a lot of opportunities while I was there, and that's where I moved from like a system administration kind of role into a software engineering role. Was at Toro. They let me kind of move.
And before we get into that, do you have any advice of like thinking back to your early days, do you have any advice kind of like entering the industry?
Well, so at the time, my thoughts, so coming out of school, like I actually had a couple of different opportunities, and I had a couple in Minnesota and I had a couple in California. And at the time I chose to stay in Minnesota, thinking that I'm going to be a big fish in a little pond. Like I know a lot, I can like really make a difference in like this company versus going and working for Cisco or something in California where I'd just be another cog in the wheel. I honestly don't know if that was the right decision, but that was the decision I made at the time. But it worked out pretty good for me. Like, could it have been better? I don't know. I don't know it's hard to say whether that's advice that I should tell like somebody who would be in that same position to stay and be like, control your own destiny in a smaller company, or go off to somewhere else and be a smaller part of bigger things.
That's kind of what I did though too. Like, I mean, we both stayed here and consulted and worked with a bunch of companies. And yeah, it's like if you have a high demand skill in a small market, you can kind of pick your jobs at.
Yeah, you can do a lot of stuff. And I think there's something special about the markets that are not big tech hubs, because in big tech hubs, there's like a little bit of like, I don't know what to call it, like haze. Like you don't know what's real and what's fluff, what's going to be the next real hot tech thing, or what somebody's just saying is the next hot tech thing. Whereas if something is interesting in a market like Minneapolis or Chicago or whatever, like chances are they make a real amount of money and are making a real difference in a lot of people's lives, just because there's much less tolerance for that fluff.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you're kind of talking about VC-backed or subsidized things where you're like, oh, okay, it could end up being $1 billion company, or it could be nothing because nobody knows, because all they do is publish like things are going great.
Right.
Whereas here we have like, the highest concentration of Fortune 500 companies in the United States. So we're like, if you're going to use, well, we can see like Java's used everywhere, .NET's used everywhere. Like you learn those stacks and you pretty much have, your career going for you, like in a city like Minneapolis.
Absolutely. And if there's a company that's hiring like engineering roles in Minneapolis, they make a crap ton of money. Like they're not going to disappear.
Yeah. You're going to have a job. Like, we know people who've just kind of kept the same job for 14, 16 years here.
Right.
And that doesn't really exist in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And then, you like, I also saw like Rooters, DevJam, Lead Pages. Like that's pretty much, you were a consultant at those places,
I was a consultant.
Right?
So there's all kinds of like relationships there where like I was an independent consultant, so I had my own company, but like to work at the biggest companies, generally that was, kind of
work through a
you have to work through somebody else.
Yeah, exactly.
And like sometimes like there's a company that has a master service agreement and they bring you in. And sometimes like a company like Thomson Reuters would have a relationship with DevJam, and then DevJam would bring me in, which was cool. Other times there'd be a situation where a company would want to hire Todd because they've heard of me, they've worked with me, whatever. And then for whatever legal reasons, there might still need to be a middleman, but they have much less power in the situation. And so it's just kind of a technicality that it's a pass-through to them.
Yeah, I remember that. I was trying to get a gig at a very large bank, for instance. And they're like, oh, yeah, you're too small. Even though we were like 10 people, it was just like, no, we had to find another larger company. I think it was like the Nerdery at the time. They had 350 people. And so somehow we had to work through them or whatever. It was just kind of like the part of the game. It's like,
it was
you
just
have to
a
be
game.
Big enough in order to get a master service agreement. Then
Exactly.
you can funnel people through your company. It was like, yeah, interesting.
And I've known a handful of like independents who have found their way to have their own master service agreement, and they're like a consultant, but then they have like a bunch of other people that also come through them, just to kind of.
And then how about like advice if you are to take that path of independence? Like, do you have like just general advice to somebody who's interested in that path?
That's a great path. I am so glad that was part of my career. It gives you the freedom to work on the projects that you want to work on without needing to tolerate the bullshit of corporate overhead. I remember like it was like the first 2 weeks of a contract at a company, and they were going through like some sort of reorg. And I didn't care at all. It didn't affect me whatsoever. But the lady who I reported to at the time, she was very concerned. She was very nice. She took me out for coffee, and she wanted to make sure that I knew what was going on and ask if I had any questions. And I'm like, is the project changing anyway? And then she's like, no. I'm like, am I still like reporting into the organization through you? She's like, yeah. Then I don't care. Nothing else matters to me here. So like it gives you all of that freedom to work on the cool technology that you want to work on without having to worry about
kind of appeal to your manager or your manager's manager.
Yeah, you don't or fill out like yearly performance reviews or worry about what the next corporate strategy is or attend all hands meetings. So you just didn't have to do any of that.
Yeah.
It's scary though. It's scary to make that leap because you move from a position where you are getting paid reliably every 2 weeks and you have a salary and healthcare and retirement and all of those things. And all of a sudden that's gone and you have to figure all of that stuff out for yourself.
Yeah, you have to figure out taxes. And then also like you could be in between a project, say a project ends or whatever, and you're looking for your next one and you could have 3-4 months where you're not.
Yeah, there could be a gap. I was fortunate that I actually never had a gap between things, but I know lots of people who do. Some people do it on purpose. Like they just want a break. And so they, have like a little nest egg saved up so that they're planning on just living off of that for a couple of months or whatever between gigs. And that's totally cool. You do have to do a lot more planning. You have to think about what you're going to do and how you're going to save for retirement and being sick and all of those sort of things. It requires a little bit more work outside of work to do those sort of things, but
also to manage your relationships. And if you do have new projects, you kind of have to like, you're almost selling yourself in a way.
You are. I like to think that like you're kind of always selling yourself though, because as big as your industry or your market is, it's not that big. Like I would find that I would work with the same people over and over and over again at different projects. True. And it was them that are your biggest asset. So like every day you go into work, you're kind of selling yourself to your peers. And so if you're a dick and you're like not fun to work around and you're argumentative and stubborn or
not technically competent
technically competent, right? If you're talking above your actual ability, whichever way that goes, people aren't going to want to work with you again. True. And so like, you're a jerk to Jane and Jane goes off to another company and then that company wants to staff up and asks if they should hire you. And she's like, no, that guy was a jerk. Well, you lost a gig. You lost an opportunity. So just don't do that. You're always selling yourself. True.
And that's where, I think we'll get into the startup aspect, but that's where I would tend to take a break and like work on a project or work on a product, whatever. Not sure if you ended up consulting at the same time as building your first product, or
absolutely,
how that worked.
So my first product came out of consulting, like directly. So I was consulting at the time of like the JavaScript renaissance kind of outbreak, in that 2010 to 2012, 2014 area where that first few frameworks were starting to come out, like jQuery UI, which I believe you are heavily involved with, and Backbone and Knockout, and that first generation of JavaScript frameworks was coming onto the scene and saying, hey, you can build your whole app in the client side and not do anything on server side. And that was a lot of companies wanted to jump on that bandwagon. And so I would go into a company and help them build it. And I built a lot of Backbone apps. But a problem that we would run into was that it's still JavaScript. It's still running in a client-side environment that is unpredictable in a lot of ways. And so they would break. They would blow up in clients' hands, oftentimes important clients that, were funding the project or something like that. So we needed ways to like monitor the sites to make sure they didn't break, but nothing really existed. And so I was at a client and I built a little monitoring system into the app. And it was cool. It was great. We funneled errors back into their other logging systems. And then I went on to another project. And you know what? They had the exact same problem. So I built another monitoring system for them. And then I went on to a third and a fourth. And like I met some other people who were doing the same thing. And then I went to a local conference here called Minibar. And I pitched a few people this idea that like, hey, maybe we should build like a monitoring service for JavaScript for the client side. And then I was still very much in my consulting world. Like we would just use it as a value add to our clients. Mm-hmm. Like we would just be like, oh, and when you hire us, you automatically get this, JavaScript monitoring system code, like as part of the package, part of hiring me. Which in retrospect was a silly idea.
But that's how we're wired. I remember thinking about a lot of my startup ideas where like, how do I get more higher paying consulting gigs? Right.
Yeah. Like maybe I can charge $5 more an hour if I come in with this thing, or $10 more an hour if I come in with that thing, or whatever. So I had this idea and I got a couple of people like excited about it to join me. And so we built something and we took it to this little user group in the area called JavaScript MN.
Which wasn't that little.
It wasn't that little.
It was like 80 people or 100 people.
And there was this one particular meetup, like I'd been to it a bunch of times, and there was this one particular one, and it happened to be hosted in the basement of Dev Jam in southern Minneapolis, which is like, it was like the baffles underneath a coffee shop, and there were like Christmas lights hanging up. And there was this other little company that was pitching on the same night that I was called Frontend Masters.
It's true, actually.
Which is where you and I actually met for the first time, or maybe not the first time, but one of the earliest times. And I don't even remember which one of us went first. I think you went first. You had pitched Frontend Masters and you were building this learning platform, and you had this cool logo of like a Zen master with like blue flames coming out of him.
That's true. Yeah. it was more like Mortal Kombat theme.
Yeah, it was very Mortal.
You grow up playing Mortal Kombat tons as a kid, and it was like, just kind of like fed into the early brand. Yeah, obviously we had to kind of, change
you grow
that
up
over.
along the way.
You grow up along the way. Be more palatable to a larger audience for sure.
And I had an equally terrible brand, which was like this thing, TrackJS with like curly brackets and a monospaced font. It was very programmer. And we pitched this tool that could monitor a certain kind of error in Chrome in Backbone. And it really only worked for like one thing at that point. But there was two different companies in the audience that were like, that's awesome. Can I buy that? I'm like, well, right now it's with our consulting. Like, no, we don't hire consultants. We just want to buy that. How do we buy that? Which is one of the things that really shifted for us and made us think about it. This is its own company that could exist outside of consulting.
That's awesome. And my experience was a little bit different. I don't think anybody bought as a result of that or intended to buy. I think like in the early days of Frontend Masters, people are like, pay for a workshop online? No, I don't understand. It was like, it took a little bit longer for that idea to take off. But I do remember also around that time period, you were asking me whether you should go the free route or paid out of the gate.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about that?
I do. So like, this is there's a lot that was going on in my life in this time. Like, I had we'd come up for this idea for what would become TrackJS in like March of, this must have been 2012, maybe 2013, one of those years. And we'd come up with this idea in March, and this JavaScript event that we went to was in July, and we were trying to figure out like what to do. And so over that fall, we were trying to build the product into something real, and we were like trying to get attention, and we'd gotten a little bit of it. We'd released something, and we'd gotten onto the front page of Hacker News, and some big companies were signing up, and everything was just free right now because we didn't really know anything about payments. We were just kind of like releasing what we knew, and you could sign up for the free beta, and we were trying to figure out, like, do we charge for this, like for everybody, or do we do the freemium model? Because it seemed like all the big companies would charge nothing for some base level and then try and get huge enterprise gigs. And we're like, well, I don't know anything. Let's just do what they're doing. So we'd have so many free users come in, and it was such a headache. And so I was reaching out to you and the founders at another local startup called Docalytics. I don't know if you remember.
I do remember
the Docalytics guys.
Yeah.
About like, what do I do? Like, do we charge? Do we charge everybody? Do we do freemium? Like, how much do we charge? How do we charge? Like, how do I actually take money from somebody? Are we ready to charge? Like, there's a lot of things that the system doesn't do yet. So many questions. And I remember a particular like meeting, and it was you and me and one of my partners on TrackJS, Eric, and Evan and Ryan from Docalytics. And I'd taken you out for beers to just pick your brain, and like both you and the Docalytics guys were just like, you have to charge money, like right now. Like, stop. Why are you not charging money? Charge money for this. Like, you've built something. There's real people using it. You have to charge money. And like the Docalytics guys, in fact, wrote me a check that night. They're just like, we just want to. Here you go. They didn't even wait for me to like sign up for it. And you wrote me this huge like email shortly after that with like all of your thoughts on like how to charge money, how to onboard customers, why value is created. It was an incredible piece of advice to get at that point. And in those months between like that fall and then like January, we figured out how to do that and started charging money.
That's awesome. I pulled a couple of quotes from it. I'll just read it.
You got that email?
Yeah. I pulled it up before this podcast because I remember it specifically. So I pulled up the email. I'll probably have to publish it online after this episode because I've been meaning to for a long time. But I said, you simply cannot go paid it fast enough. Charging from day one lets you get a small pool of people that will give you real feedback, as opposed to free users who will say, I wish it did this and that and the other thing, like constantly. And that was my experience. Like, when you give something away for free, people always want more. And when you put up a credit card, they'll not only give you like real feedback of them trying to use it because they're trying to get their, ideally they make more money off of what they pay you. Mm-hmm. But also you get their objections, like, why didn't I pay? Like, yeah, I don't want to buy it because of X, Y, or Z. And you can like listen to those objections. And then also after they do pay, like, real complaints and like actually fix those problems. And so I think it's just like a quality signal to noise ratio, I think, when you go paid versus free. Like, I've seen people make free work, but generally they have like VC money and these kinds of things,
Very
which is, a path that you can take.
That is brilliant advice.
Thanks, Todd.
I have repeated that advice many times over the last 10 years as other people have asked me for advice on what to do. Charging money as soon as you can. Like, just exactly what you said. It gives you the signal. It teaches you who your real customers are, as opposed to people who are just kicking an idea around and have never any intention of signing it up or of signing up for it. Money will qualify the people who matter.
Yeah, they have like real skin in the games. They're gonna try to get that real value out versus it's just it could be just entertainment. They're just bored one day and they sign up for your free thing. And then how is your team structured? You mentioned your co-founder Eric.
Yeah, so we have a bit of an unusual thing. So so we're an entirely bootstrapped company. Like we never took out any outside investment of any kind. And that's kind of enabled us to do something weird, is that we're not even a C Corp. We are a limited liability partnership. So me and my founders were all independent consultants. So we all had our own companies. And so we already had all of the structure ourselves to save for our own retirement, and we had our own healthcare, and we had all of those things. So we didn't need to do any of those things as a company. And in fact, none of us leapt into full time right away. We all kept consulting on the side as we built up TrackJS. TrackJS came to existence from moonlighting nights and weekends.
So at what point did you start TrackJS and then actually replace your income where you're no longer consulting? Like how many years did that take?
So we started making real money in 2013 is when the first dollars of revenue started coming in for TrackJS. And then it probably made enough that I could have stopped consulting in 2015.
Wow, 2 years.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It took 2 years.
And that's really fast.
It could have been faster. We made a lot of mistakes. A lot of mistakes. We spent so much time.
Like what's one mistake? Yeah.
We spent so much time engineering and adding more features, thinking that we just need feature X and then this thing is going to take off. Feature Y and then this thing is going to take off. And what we needed to do was stop doing that and start marketing the product. Start getting out there and talking to people and selling it and blogging and making videos and going to conferences and doing all those sort of things. If I had done all of those things sooner, the growth would have happened sooner. We didn't need a lot of the features that we ended up building in that time.
Yeah, I mean that's a typical programmer turned entrepreneur. We think if I just build this full rocket ship that could do everything, and then nobody's there to fly it because it's just you built the rocket ship, but and then turns out half the rocket ship is built improperly, so it'd blow up anyway, as if somebody did try to. So anyways,
it's a rocket designed to go to the wrong place that nobody wants to go.
Exactly. Nobody's going to pay for it so you have a pile of over-engineered hunk of something that doesn't actually work. Yep. And I think that's the most common problem that I see, a lot of indie hackers or small makers or creators or whatever. It's build and engineer this thing for years before even really talking about it.
That's because engineering is fun. Building things is fun, and I want to do it. I'm going to use every mental excuse I can think of to spend time engineering because I enjoy it. Even what I need to do is I need to sit down and write 10 sales emails and write a blog post and record a video and do all those things aren't as fun. They feel like work, and I don't want to do them. And so it's still a problem to this day. There's the things I know I should do, and then there's the things I want to do.
Yeah, there's definitely a healthy tension. I always say the number one thing people want about being self-employed is freedom, freedom to choose. But then what you realize on the other end of it is when you have freedom to choose, now you have to choose.
Now you have to choose the thing that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
There's the old startup adage is you work for yourself, so you get to choose which 80 hours per week you want to work.
Exactly. And yeah, a lot of the things as an entrepreneur or whatever, don't end up being that fun. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is marketing. I've had to do it for my company too, go more from programmer to, marketing, thinking more about that side of the fence for sure. And then, so how many co-founders do you have?
So there's 3 of us. So myself, Eric Brandis, and Jordan Griffin. And we were all independent consultants, and we started this thing nights and weekends until it made enough money that we could all stop consulting. But it's led to an interesting structure, is that the company is just a shell partnership that just passes, at the end of a month, I say, all right, here's how much money we made. Here's our costs. Here's what I'm going to retain for whatever it is we're going to do, and then take the rest of it and I split it along equity lines and give it to the partners that are then responsible for doing their own taxes and getting their own healthcare and all of the things they need to do. So the structure of TrackJS is really, really simple.
And how long have you worked with them?
10 years at this point, 11 years.
And do you have any tips for like maintaining good, healthy like relationships with your partners for that long?
Yeah.
Not a lot of people work for a decade plus together.
So one of the things that we found is we don't have an office. We don't have a cool space like this. We just work out of our homes. And in the early days, that was fine because we usually saw each other like through our day jobs, like consulting. Like we might be like consulting at the same place sometimes. But as we went more and more full time, like we wouldn't see each other, and we found that arguments would start. Like you'd start like stop seeing these people that you were working with as real human beings and just people you're arguing with on the other side of a chat window.
Avatars.
Right. And like, why won't Eric let me do this thing? I think it's really important. And like, it created problems. And so what we decided to do, like, as I think this was in like 2015 or 2016, is we started a thing where every 3 weeks we have the standing meeting is that Friday afternoons, we go to a bar or a restaurant. We spend all afternoon drinking or planning, catching up on each other's lives, just so that we like maintain the relationships. And it's something that like, it's silly, but it's important. Like I can't underline how important it is that you have to maintain those personal relationships with your team in order for things to continue to run smoothly in every other way. So this was a thing that like during COVID, I kind of watched the rest of the world learn this like 5 years after we had already learned it, because like we'd already figured out how to work remotely effectively and like the practices that we need to put in place. And then suddenly everybody was working remotely all the time. And I saw everybody get into fights with each other and like petty bickering happen. I'm like, you just need to find a time to like bullshit with each other.
Yeah. 100% agree with that. I mean, I worked as a remote, like fully remote for 7 years as a programmer, consulting, that kind of thing. Had no issues with that. And as well as some of my coworkers, colleagues today, like same thing, they worked remotely. But yeah, like during COVID, it was definitely like there was a distancing because we didn't do it remote from the start. We have this space and we had to go fully remote during COVID. And that's where, we learned exactly what you're talking about, which is, just like having a meal together changes everything. It changes the whole dynamic of the way you chat with each other, the way you think of each other. Like, it's just like, I don't know, something about, I think it's what you said, like seeing each other as real people.
Yeah.
And also, like, I noticed, for instance, we were doing a quarterly planning meeting and we're all over Zoom, and it's like, I couldn't wait for that thing to end when it was like an hour in, right? Whereas when we did the same thing over a meal, it was like 4 hours in, and we were just excited about like the future of Frontend Masters and all the things that we could build. And we had like, 3 documents that were all like categorized and organized. We had just like accomplished so much more, and we're just stoked by the end of it versus like over Zoom, I think it's different when you're like programming something that's very like, okay, I'm going to program this feature. Like that works really well remotely. But when you're like, hey, let's get together and talk about the future of our company, it's like a little bit different.
Yeah. You need more of the body language that doesn't quite carry over Zoom, especially if it's like a high value transaction kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, so you've done it once with TrackJS, and then you decide to go build a second product.
Yeah.
Like, how did that come about?
So in 2020, we'd kind of reached a point where we thought the feature set of TrackJS was like really mature, and we've always been like worried about like overbuilding in the product. Like we looked at like products like Jira, and I don't mean to crap on Jira, but it's so fun to crap on, where like they just threw a checkbox in for every single thing that anybody has ever asked for. And it doesn't make it better. It just keeps making it worse, which is why like then Trello comes up, and then they buy Trello, and then they're making Trello worse. And then there'll be a new one that comes up that does this, like a third of the same things, and it'll be better. And so we were like just really worried about that. And so we didn't want to just keep dumping more and more and more stuff into that platform. But one of the things that a lot of people were asking about was web performance. It's like, my site isn't broken, it's just slow. How do I know when it's slow or why it's slow? And so we started thinking about that. And we were thinking like, we decided to build it as a separate product. One, because we didn't want to like bloat TrackJS. But second, we thought the customer was a little bit different. Is that TrackJS gets used by all different kinds of sites, but like the biggest customers of TrackJS tend to be like private intranet applications, like something behind a paywall or a login wall or something like that. And the people who seem to care the most about web performance tend to be not like public sites, like e-commerce sites and media publishers and stuff like that. And I think that has a lot to do with like SEO and the SEO value of performance and stuff like that. But so it's a little bit different customer group as well. And so we decided to build it as a new thing. And I go back and forth on whether or not that was the right decision or not. But for better or worse, that's the decision we made. And we started building RequestMetrics as this performance monitoring product. And we've definitely had some growing pains over the last 4 years where, we overbuilt some things because engineering is fun and we were building something new and we should have gotten back into marketing. So we kind of made some of the same mistakes. And we kind of thrashed around a little bit. We built some features that I thought were really cool, but didn't have a market for it. Like we built this whole security monitoring like subset of RequestMetrics because I know a bunch of like security engineers and there's some really cool problems in that space. And so I took a little run at some of it and I thought it was really neat. And I did some conference talks about it. But I don't know, nobody wanted to buy it.
Yeah, it's really not your audience either.
It's not. Right? Yeah, I'm
like
not
maybe
really.
If you're like big into the security space, it would work.
Yeah,
but yeah. And then speaking of building, like, what was your stack, or what is your stack? Is this the same as TrackJS, or
it's a little different? So some of the things that we did in TrackJS worked really well, and we kept. So TrackJS was built on .NET with Elasticsearch and Redis is the major things that we use in TrackJS. In RequestMetrics, we like Redis is great. Really like Redis. We really like .NET, but like we don't like running .NET on Windows because Windows is hard to maintain as a platform. So we switched to the newer .NET Core so that we could deploy everything onto Linux, and that's been great. Elasticsearch, we replaced Elasticsearch with a newer database stack called Clickhouse, which is just really, really good for web analytics. There's a few things it doesn't do as well as Elasticsearch, but by and large, for most of our use cases, it's a better fit. And then
did you hear that, everybody? You said .NET Core is great.
.NET Core. Oh my God, .NET Core. .NET Core is amazing. I am so excited.
I think people like crap on Microsoft.
No, I am so excited that you are launching some .NET. Is that public?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I am so excited that you're launching some .NET courses because .NET has always been like a great, like C# is the best programming language. It's got so many ergonomics, so many tools in place, and it runs so fast. You don't have to think about things like, unless you're doing something really crazy, you don't have to think about like memory management and threading and stuff like that. It like handles so much of those things for you. And it's just a pleasure to write code in. The problem has always been that you had to deploy it on Windows and you had to do it in Visual Studio. And those were just blockers to a lot of people. But with .NET Core and like third-party IDEs and deploying on Linux is way more accessible to way more people. And I think that's cool. It's still kind of a niche. Like people still have like thoughts and feelings about .NET, but I think it is an excellent language to use. And like there's a huge marketplace for .NET jobs in the world. Like,
so .NET Core and Clickhouse. What about the client piece?
So like the front end?
Yeah.
So we produce like the main UI of RequestMetrics is a .NET MVC app that then we augment with a couple of client-side things to make it more interactive. So like our filtering thing is a kind of a complex bit of UI. And so that's like a little Preact app. We really like Preact because it doesn't, partially because like it's smaller than React. It's a little faster than React. Also because it just doesn't change as fast. And like we don't want to constantly be chasing after frameworks that are just moving things. So like we picked something that's a little older, a little bit more stable. And then we use a little bit of HTMX to like do some swapping out of elements. And then we use a general pattern called PJAX, which is the same architectural pattern that HTMX is kind of using. But it's basically when you click on a link or go to a different part of the page, rather than doing a full navigation, it makes a fetch request to the server. The server returns a partial HTML response, and then we flip it out. So it doesn't have to like reparse the whole thing.
Yeah. That's exactly what, HTMX is kind of like built around, right?
Yep.
So you kind of like,
So we kind of do that at two different layers. Like the whole app is doing that using just a PJAX library that we found. And then individual boxes, like individual widgets on the page might do that as well with HTMX.
And you mentioned that both these products are bootstrapped. And do you have any advice for like people building in kind of those early stages?
Well, we've already shared a few pieces of advice, which is charge early.
Yeah.
The other thing, don't over-engineer it, right? Like, get out there and talk to people because you're probably building the wrong thing, but you don't know what part of it's wrong until you talk to people. I would say like we did it in a very conservative, safe way where we like didn't quit our jobs. And honestly, I think that was it's not the right decision for everybody, but it was the right decision for us because it enabled us to really go at the pace we wanted to go, at the pace our energy like let us keep working on it, because we weren't like so thirsty for money to pay our bills that we would make sacrifices. Like we built the product we wanted because we weren't really dependent on it in any way yet.
You had time.
We had time. We had our own runway.
That's awesome. And then what do you think about like now that you've kind of competed against VC-backed companies, you've kind of like, would you choose bootstrapping versus VC?
It's a complicated question. So like we competed against a bunch of very well-funded companies and they gobbled up way more of the market than we did, which is fine. What's hard to understand is that as a company, if we look at TrackJS versus some of the much bigger monitoring players, we couldn't compete with them on ad spend. And those companies would drive up the cost of advertising on most platforms just because they had such deeper pockets. And so we had to be like really creative about how we did things, like with personal relationships with people. And a lot of it came down to selling ourselves as much as it came as selling the product. As I would sell so many subscriptions to TrackJS because of people who knew me and trusted me and knew of me as a developer and knew that I was involved in the product. And so marketing on that, like that's something that a big, well-funded company can't compete with, is because by the time they're that big, there's no one person that's involved in it at that level. So you're still buying from some big company. So it's very personal when you're small and bootstrapped. And you have to be creative in how you compete with them. You also have to be very, very focused. So like TrackJS has remained focused on JavaScript monitoring in the face of like all the competitors have gone and done like multi-platform and done mobile and done server and done all kinds of things. And we just don't have the resources to like do all of those things. And I feel like it's a fundamentally different problem monitoring a server versus monitoring a client. That I think their products all got a little worse when they bridged that gap. Because on a server, every error is important. Like you care about that server. If there was an exception on that server, it was a real failure that somebody should look at. But like 90% of errors on the client are garbage. And so the real problem in client-side monitoring is signal versus noise, is knowing which is the 10% that's important. And our whole product is catered to solving that problem, which makes it good. It makes it unique. It makes it different. And I think that's the advice, is stay really, really small in your scope and do something that the other players can't because they're going after too big of a market.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say that's fundamentally why Frontend Masters has continued to be successful as well. Just like really nailing like reliable courses for a very, specific demographic, which is, front end engineers. And we've expanded over the years, but that's the core that still trusts us and buys from us, and why you tend to not, only buy the other player. It's like also companies buy Frontend Masters, but it's for less people, but we're really catering to a niche deeply, and I think that that lines up with what you're doing with TrackJS for sure. And then also like throughout this whole kind of journey from consulting to building products, like you've also taught along the way.
Yeah.
Like how did you get into like speaking and teaching?
So I was speaking at conferences before I started TrackJS. It was part of like my consulting kind of job. I saw that as like building my reputation and building up a client base and stuff like that. And so when TrackJS started, it was kind of a move into that. I just started talking more and more about JavaScript monitoring, JavaScript debugging, that sort of thing. And from that sort of like short form, like hour conference talks, moving into training was actually pretty natural. Like a lot of those same places would say, hey, do you want to do an all-day workshop on debugging or whatever? And so that was really great. And then, connections are weird. And like that same like weird little company that I pitched at JavaScript MN with reached out to me and said, hey, Todd, do you want to do a debugging course for Frontend Masters? And I wasn't sure because, they were a little rinky-dink operation. I wasn't really sure. But it worked out really well. And so I did a debugging course for you. And that was a lot of fun. And then more recently, when my focus shifted from errors and debugging into performance, I learned a lot about that space, and I started speaking about that. And so I came back and did a web performance course in 2021. That the web performance space is shifting so fast that a lot of it had already been outdated by now. So we just finished recording.
Version 2, that's bigger and better.
That's bigger and better and longer.
And people just absolutely love that performance course. So you did a fantastic job with that. We're excited about version 2. And but how about like any advice for getting into speaking and teaching?
I would say that start small and work your way up, right? So most local meetup groups are hungry for content, especially from like local people that's part of the community. So go to your local JavaScript meetup, go to your local Ruby or .NET meetup or whatever, and engage with them, talk to the organizers. Think about like what sort of things are you working on? Because you don't have to do something that's like crazy and unique in the world. Like everybody has their own things that are interesting. So do a case study of whatever you're doing on right now and put together like a half-hour kind of summary about like what's interesting, what were the challenges, how did you overcome them, whatever. And most meetups would like love to have that kind of content. And once you do that once or twice or 3 times and you start getting comfortable, go up to like local conferences. There's probably a couple in your area. I actually just got a notice that their DevFest MN, which is the local Google conference in the Twin Cities, is opened their call for papers. And I'm probably going to submit a talk on like web performance or Core Web Vitals or something. But like those kind of events would love to take new people to expand the horizon. They don't want to keep hearing from Todd over and over and over again. And once you just kind of keep building that into bigger and bigger and bigger conferences as you want. And one thing that I've actually found is that it's kind of easier to get into conferences that are farther away from you because like you're kind of exotic. You're different, right? Like when I love NDC Oslo. It's one of my favorite conferences. And one of the things that's unique there is that like most of the other people are Norwegian. There's not a lot of Midwestern Americans that show up, and the kind of problems that I have experienced in my career are very different than theirs. And they think that difference is interesting. It creates a better conversation with the overall group. And so don't be afraid to like reach out to something that's like in another part of the world because you think it's out of your league or whatever. Like sometimes like they just want somebody that's different.
Yeah. I'd say some of the most fun I've ever had speaking at conferences was in like Italy and Israel and Ireland and all over the place. So yeah, definitely give it a shot. It's great advice. And do you have anything on your horizon, either career-wise or otherwise, that you're really excited about right now?
I am still really excited about RequestMetrics. That's where I'm spending the majority of my time right now. I just launched a web performance email course, actually. I took a lot of the stuff that I put together in the Frontend Masters and I kind of consolidated it down into like emails that come out like every 2 days or something like that you can subscribe on requestmetrics.com and get those. I think that's really cool. I'm going to be doing a bunch more content there. And I'm putting together a intermediate web performance course for Frontend Masters that's going to cover some more advanced topics like API design and service workers and advanced caching techniques and some other stuff like that I think is going to be really fun.
How about personally? Do you have any like bucket list things or anything that you're excited about?
We just moved into a new house, which is really exciting. I'm going to be working on that and painting it and fixing up some things and making that awesome. I have spent the last couple of years traveling a lot for conferences, so I'm actually super excited to stay home.
It's a good idea. I mean, we all have seasons in life, but yeah, you were really... how many like conferences did you speak at in like a year?
I kind of peaked in like 2017, where I did 22.
Wow.
So that was a lot. It was a lot of travel. It was exhausting. It was hard on me and my family. It was too many. So like I've been kind of ramping down every year since then. It kind of went to nothing during COVID because COVID.
Yeah.
Started coming back a little bit, but like I feel like the sweet spot is like just doing 2 or 3 a year for me.
Okay.
That's probably where I'm going to try and maintain.
Yeah, I should get back up to 2 or 3 a year because, I mean, basically I think it was like 2007 to 2014 I did. So it's like 7 years. I did at least 60 conferences. So it was like, 10 a year or so. I thought that was pretty good. But yeah, once I had kids, I was like, I don't want to be gone.
I don't want to be gone,
right?
right?
Yeah.
It's so hard. I felt so like my kids remember 2017 as like I was gone even more than I actually was. And that like kind of sucks. Like I had my daughter actually tell me like, yeah, you were traveling like every week you were gone. I'm like, I wasn't. But it was a lot.
Yeah.
It made me feel bad.
Maybe a little too much at that time period.
Maybe a little too much.
Yeah. But I mean, you're building a successful company that you have right now that's paying more than paying your bills. Yep. And you have like 2 houses and whatever. You're doing well for yourself. So how about, do you have any themes that sort of like, or a theme that kind of ties your career together?
I had this advice or this idea that came to me back when I was at Toro. And at Toro, they had this thing called the Quarter Century Club. And it was this big wall in the main hallway of all the people who had worked at Toro for 25 years or longer. And they would celebrate it and stuff like that. And I remember talking to a guy who was retiring from IT. And he was there when like the first mainframes went in, like, and when they came out, like his career kind of spanned that. And I remember kind of thinking that I don't want to be that. And nothing against like him and people who want to, but like it felt like you don't really things change so fast in engineering and software that like if you stay at the same place for too long, you're not really getting any more experience. You're just redoing the same year over and over and over again. And so I think that's my theme, is that I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. I don't know what I'm going to do next. Right now, I'm still focused on TrackJS and RequestMetrics and keeping them going. But I know that I'm not going to do it forever. I'm going to do something else at some point. I just don't know what that is yet.
Nice. So you're always kind of like got your eye open for, the next thing, and
Yeah.
you want to do the best that you can with your current project, but also
like at some point I'm going to want to do something different, and it's going to probably want to be like very different, just so I'm not repeating the same thing I've already done.
Yeah, and I would say there's a study that on perception of time that I was reading at one point, and they talked about the rate of change when you change your life, or you experience awe, whether it's like climbing a mountain or a big career change or whatever, a change in direction, like those type of things actually slow down your perception of time. So the more you get into like a routine, the more like you said, year after year, it's the same, like you're actually accelerating your life, like to the point where you're actually going to perceive that you're dying sooner than you are.
Yeah.
Because,
life's on autopilot.
It's on autopilot, yeah. So the more you do have routines, and routines are necessary, like brushing your teeth or whatever, but like these kind of...
No, I brush my teeth randomly throughout
the day.
There's no routine.
Just sometimes Todd brushes his teeth after breakfast. And whatever. Anyways, yeah. So that... I totally agree with that. Like, if you're kind of in that same... like whatever bubble, you're gonna just you're gonna get your name up on a 25-year wall.
Yeah, I don't want my name on a 25-year wall on anything.
Yeah, I like that. Cool. Well, with that, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Mark.
Todd.
Always fun.
Yeah, it's very fun. All right, cheers. Hey there, before you go, don't forget we're new at this, so any feedback, whether it's a like or subscribe, we'll take those, or a comment about what you didn't like or what you'd like to see more of in the future, we'll definitely incorporate that into the next episodes. I'm really enjoying these conversations, so any type of feedback would be fantastic, and especially sharing it with your friends and colleagues. So really appreciate it. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one.